9 Unsolved Mysteries with Strange Links to the Occult. In the 1980s, Americans began fearing cults and Satanists, and the fear was largely unfounded. In hindsight, most of it stemmed from TV shows exploiting audience insecurities for ratings. However, the following cases really do have strange links to mysticism. Were occult groups responsible for these deaths? Or was the panic overblown? 1. Rachel Runyon. On a summer day nearly 30 years ago, a man used the promise of bubble gum and ice cream to entice 3-year-old Rachel Runyon away from a Sunset Park. Inside the girl's home, located less than 15 feet away, her mother was unaware of the abduction, as she prepared sloppy joes for her children's lunch on August 26, 1982. "It is like some demon swooped out of the sky, and we have never seen her again," Elaine Runyon Simmons said this week of her daughter. The girl's almost unrecognizable body was discovered 24 days later, naked and hog-tied, in a stream in Morgan County. Runyon Simmons has never stopped hoping the killer will be found, and police are still looking. Sunset Police Chief Ken Eborn said this week that detectives are currently checking out a former Utah resident, now living in Pennsylvania, who has been a longtime person of interest in the case. The girl's mother believes the Pennsylvania man may be her daughter's killer. "This same guy keeps surfacing," Runyon Simmons said. "You can't help but keep your eye on him." Eborn said Rachel's abductor talked with children at the park playground for at least 15 minutes before enticing Rachel away, according to police interviews with the girl's 5-year-old brother, Justin, and a 10-year-old child, who were also playing at the park. The children described the man who took Rachel as a black male, 25-35 years old, about 6 feet tall, with a medium build and a mustache. The children said the man drove away in a 4-door, dark blue car with wood grain stripes on the side. No adults were at the park to provide a description. Despite physical similarities between the Pennsylvania man and descriptions of the kidnapper, Eborn called the new lead not as promising as he once thought, and said the Pennsylvania man is not the only person they are watching. Out of 100 possible suspects, Eborn said, this man is in their top 20. "I think we would be doing a disservice to this case if we focused on him and him alone," Eborn said. The man, now 50 years old, came to the attention of police again because of an Amber Alert issued last year in Pennsylvania, after he allegedly took his child following an argument with a girlfriend. The child was safely returned and the man was later charged with domestic violence-related crimes. He also has a violent criminal history in Utah, according to court records. Police, who have chosen not to release the man's name, say he lived in the Sunset area at the time of Rachel's abduction, and also has lived in New Mexico, Arkansas, and Pennsylvania. Police have organized 10 full 3-ring blinders of case information from their own city and outside agencies, including Ogden and Davis County, and even the FBI. Police also have about 10 banker boxes full of phoned-in leads. In 2007, Eborn used a grant from the Utah Attorney General's office to pay for DNA testing of items found near the girl's body. Eborn said this week that although he has tentative results of the DNA tests, they have not helped advance the investigation. A $58,000 reward has been posted for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of Rachel's killer. Runyon Simmons said it is hard to be patient, but all she can do is believe that one day someone will come forward. "I love her very much, I miss her," Runyon Simmons said of her daughter. "There isn't a day I haven't thought of her and honored her." Sounds like they have a suspect, but I've read some articles that state that nobody is coming forward, because the suspect has been making death threats towards those who may have information. There were also reports at one time of someone leaving black roses on Rachel's grave. "I know this happened in the time of satanic panic, and people were still associating murders with cult activity. It's a sad case that still has no ending."
2. Leroy Carter Jr. On February 7, 1981, Leroy Carter Jr., a 29-year-old African-American, was walking through Golden Gate Park in San Francisco searching for a place to sleep. He found a secluded spot next to Alvord Lake, where he slipped into his sleeping bag and went to sleep. The papers didn't say much about the murder. Those papers that did run the story relegated it to a small blurb hidden somewhere near the back. To many, it was just the story of a dead homeless man, and it was only the manner of his death that made it notable. Carter had been found decapitated, and evidence found at the scene pointed towards voodoo. Alvord Lake sits at the eastern edge of Golden Gate Park, across from the iconic Haight-Ashbury district. The epicenter of the hippie movement of the 1960s, the Haight was filled with lost children living on the streets, and searching for meaning and purpose. Some found that purpose, but as the 70s rolled on, drugs, especially heroin, devastated the district. Free love and peace had been replaced by a growing epidemic of overdoses and crime. However, during the 1980s the Haight made a comeback as a new generation moved in. There was a growing and proud homosexual community, a budding comedy scene that launched the careers of Whoopi Goldberg and Robin Williams, and white upper-middle-class families, merging with Haight's colorful past. A McDonald's opened at the far west end of the district. Haight-Ashbury was officially gentrified. Just across the street, in the shadow of those golden arches, was Golden Gate Park. A popular spot for tourists, it was also a haven for thugs and junkies searching for victims and a fix. Police warned tourists to avoid the park. Leroy Carter Jr. was an African-American man who survived the Vietnam War, only to return home with no direction or guidance. He found comfort on the streets, surviving day-to-day just as he had done in the jungles of Vietnam. Carter was a petty criminal with a vagrant's rap sheet, doing what needed to be done to get by. There was nothing about his life that seemed to be linked to the occult or voodoo. From all outward appearances, it looked as though Leroy Carter Jr. just picked the wrong place to sleep. When the police found Carter's body, he was still in his sleeping bag by the lake. His head was missing, sliced clean through. 2 corn cobs and a chicken wing had been jammed into his severed neck. 50 yards from the body, police found the mutilated remains of several dead chickens. The case was assigned to SFPD Inspector Sandy Gallant. Gallant had recently headed up the department's investigation into the Jonestown massacre in Guyana and its connection to San Francisco. In doing so, she had become the department's expert on cults and religious ritualistic killings. Many of the cults surrounding San Francisco were born out of communal lifestyles of the late 60s and early 70s. Although most of these communes had either dissolved or learned to continue on as a peaceful assembly of like-minded spirits, a small minority had morphed into cults. But Leroy's murder didn't have the markings of your average white bread Manson-esque hippie cult. The dead chicken pointed something not all that common in San Francisco. Inspector Gallant turned to Dade County, Florida Coroner Charles Watley, the country's leading expert on Santeria. Santeria was brought to the New World on slave ships. It began with the Yoruba people, an African tribe living in what is now north-central Nigeria. It developed in the Caribbean, where it merged with elements of Christianity, before coming to the southern coast of the United States. Sacrifice plays a major role in Santeria, but mostly involves the use of live chicken, but there are those underground sects who still seek out human victims. Watley informed Inspector Gallant that the ritual was not yet complete. If this was indeed Santeria, the killer would be returning to the scene of the crime, 42 days later, to return the body's head. For the next 41 days, investigators sifted through evidence which all lead nowhere, but in the back of her mind Gallant knew day 42 was fast approaching. On March 22, 1981, Gallant and her partner were back in the park, staking out the spot where Carter's headless body was found. Despite their vigilance, the killer placed the head in the weeds next to Alvord Lake without being detected. The killer had completed the ritual and gotten away yet again. The head gave police no new leads into the murder, and the case went cold. Gallant eventually became an outspoken opponent of the popular role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, even giving lectures warning parents of its connection to occult murder and suicide. Leroy Carter Jr.'s remains were interred at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. To this day, Leroy Carter Jr.'s murder remains unsolved.
3. Baby Doe. On the cold and rain-filled morning March 14, 1986, a road crew found the body of infant boy, perhaps only several hours old. He had been strangled, his jaw was broken, and his face mutilated. Yet he was wrapped in white blood-stained blankets. Someone had laid coins, pieces of fruit, and other objects around the body, and a burlap halter was placed near the body as well. Close by the corpse, police found bloody pajama top and bottom, that probably belonged to the infant's mother. Because of that, In a case without almost any leads at all, the police do have a full DNA profile of the baby's unknown mother. Whoever butchered the child made no attempts to hide the body, which told investigators several things. The murderer left the corpse out in the open near the banks of Lake Mohegan in Fairfield, Connecticut, where they knew it would be discovered. In what might be a related incident, the police learned that just 18 hours before the baby was found dead on the lake shore, that someone had delivered a baby in a bathroom stall of a building that then housed a bank data processing center. Someone who worked there read about the baby at the lake and notified investigators, but unfortunately an investigator said, "The cleaning crew cleaned it up. We didn't find out about it until 2 days later, when someone from the building read about the baby found at Lake Mohegan." The coins, pieces of fruit, and other objects lying around the baby's body seemed to indicate that the baby was part of a ritual involving Paloma Omb, or perhaps the secrecy surrounded Santeria, a combination of religious traditions drawn from the Yoruba faith, with roots in Africa and South America, and the worship of Catholic saints. Both Santeria and Paloma Omb, an offshoot of Santeria, are known to ritually use human remains. The organizational structure of both Santeria and Paloma Omb follows the model of a family, a leftover from the days of slavery when blood families often were broken up by slaveholders. This model was particularly significant and taken literally. Considering that fact, it was odd that years after the killing, police detectives followed a clue about a local drug gang called Number 1 Family, which led the police to a home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where foster children were living in 1986. We discovered, and investigators said, there were a lot of complaints of sexual abuse that were happening in the home, but the clues led to nowhere. The case is still open. Santeria is said to be widely used by Caribbean dope dealers operating in the United States, and investigators have reported finding Santeria altars in drug dealers' homes on numerous occasions. So was the murder related to a dope deal? They wanted him to be found. The cops said it was probably a message killing, and the killer knew that such a horrific murder would get plenty of press coverage. The location of the body also told the police that the killer or killers knew or familiar with the area, because the north end of the lake is not a place you would stumble upon. But there have been other ritual-related cases in the Nutmeg State. On April 22, 2007, Imani Joyner died and been buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Stamford. Born by an emergency cesarean section, at 27 weeks Imani weighed only 2 pounds and 12 ounces. Doctors determined that she had semilobar holoprosencephaly, a condition that causes babies to die before birth or shortly after. However, Imani survived until she was 2.5 years old. She had been considered a miracle baby by her doctors. In 2009, 2 men were fishing in Passaic River in Clifton, NJ, and found Imani Joyner's body in a sealed plastic garbage bag at the shoreline. Police were able to identify the corpse from a bracelet on the girl's wrist from the hospice where she was being treated when she died, which led them to Imani's grave. When they exhumed the site, all they found was an empty coffin that had been broken into. The casket was broken and smashed in, and it looks like the body was pulled up through that hole, an investigator said. State police think that the child's corpse was stolen for use in ritual to capture her fighting spirit.
4. Howard Green and Carol Marin. Almost inevitably, given the uncanny circumstances surrounding various of the crimes mentioned in this column, the words ritual and occult are likely to pop up. But in law enforcement terms, these phrases are overused. Many serial murder cases are described as having ritualistic elements, when in fact the killings are just plain weird, the reason for that being the perpetrators are insane. Cults and other criminal groups who claim to dabble in the occult often know nothing about the ancient art, but use it as a means by which to divide and control their followers, or maybe to gain sexual and financial favors. However, some unexplained cases, though they are few and far between, bear genuine hallmarks of Satanist activity, and perhaps the most infamous of these concerns the murders of Howard Green and Carol Marin in New Jersey. It was a cold evening in December 1979, when motorists in West Paterson sighted 2 figures lying by the roadside. Police were called, and on arrival discovered the sackcloth-wrapped corpses of a man and woman. Their names were Howard Green and Carol Marin, and they had both been beaten to death. But it didn't end there. Both of them clasped knots of black hair in their hands and bore strange but identical mutilations. For example, both their faces had been smashed in from the left side and both had been stabbed through the right eye. In addition, and more bewildering and ghoulish still, both bodies had been completely drained of blood. Equally odd, especially in the light of such off-the-wall carnage, was the apparent normality of Green and Marin's everyday lives. A cab driver and a secretary, aged 53 and 33 respectively, they'd led a seemingly mundane existence in Brooklyn. But when detectives searched their apartment they found extensive black magic paraphernalia. Friends of the couple were unable to assist, claiming to have seen them on a New York subway train the day before the murders and detecting nothing strange. But a short time later the journalist Maury Terry received an anonymous letter discussing the incident, apparently directing him to a shadowy group whom it referred to as Odo, and hinting that more satanic murders might follow. Attempts have been made to connect the aforementioned Odo with the Ordo Templi Orientis, a spiritual and philosophical society, which Aleister Crowley was once a leading member of, but if this was ever a genuine clue it led nowhere. No additional homicides obviously linked to the double slaying have followed, and it remains unsolved to this day.
3. Baby Doe. On the cold and rain-filled morning March 14, 1986, a road crew found the body of infant boy, perhaps only several hours old. He had been strangled, his jaw was broken, and his face mutilated. Yet he was wrapped in white blood-stained blankets. Someone had laid coins, pieces of fruit, and other objects around the body, and a burlap halter was placed near the body as well. Close by the corpse, police found bloody pajama top and bottom, that probably belonged to the infant's mother. Because of that, in a case without almost any leads at all, the police do have a full DNA profile of the baby's unknown mother. Whoever butchered the child made no attempts to hide the body, which told investigators several things. The murderer left the corpse out in the open near the banks of Lake Mohegan in Fairfield, Connecticut, where they knew it would be discovered. In what might be a related incident, the police learned that just 18 hours before the baby was found dead on the lake shore, that someone had delivered a baby in a bathroom stall of a building that then housed a bank data processing center. Someone who worked there read about the baby at the lake and notified investigators, but unfortunately an investigator said, "The cleaning crew cleaned it up. We didn't find out about it until 2 days later, when someone from the building read about the baby found at Lake Mohegan." The coins, pieces of fruit, and other objects lying around the baby's body seemed to indicate that the baby was part of a ritual involving Paloma Omb, or perhaps the secrecy surrounded Santeria, a combination of religious traditions drawn from the Yoruba faith, with roots in Africa and South America, and the worship of Catholic saints. Both Santeria and Paloma Omb, an offshoot of Santeria, are known to ritually use human remains. The organizational structure of both Santeria and Paloma Omb follows the model of a family, a leftover from the days of slavery when blood families often were broken up by slaveholders. This model was particularly significant and taken literally. Considering that fact, it was odd that years after the killing, police detectives followed a clue about a local drug gang called Number 1 Family, which led the police to a home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where foster children were living in 1986. We discovered, and investigators said, there were a lot of complaints of sexual abuse that were happening in the home, but the clues led to nowhere. The case is still open. Santeria is said to be widely used by Caribbean dope dealers operating in the United States, and investigators have reported finding Santeria altars and drug dealers' homes on numerous occasions. So was the murder related to a dope deal? They wanted him to be found. The cops said it was probably a message killing, and the killer knew that such a horrific murder would get plenty of press coverage. The location of the body also told the police that the killer or killers knew or familiar with the area, because the north end of the lake is not a place you would stumble upon. But there have been other ritual-related cases in the Nutmeg State. On April 22, 2007, Imani Joyner died and been buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Stamford. Born by an emergency cesarean section, at 27 weeks Imani weighed only 2 pounds and 12 ounces. Doctors determined that she had semilobar holoprosencephaly, a condition that causes babies to die before birth or shortly after. However, Imani survived until she was 2.5 years old. She had been considered a miracle baby by her doctors. In 2009, 2 men were fishing in Passaic River in Clifton, and Jayan found Amani Joyner body in a sealed plastic garbage bag at the shoreline. Police were able to identify the corpse from a bracelet on the girl's wrist from the hospice where she was being treated when she died, which led them to Amani's grave. When they exhumed the site, all they found was an empty coffin that had been broken into. The casket was broken and smashed in, and it looks like the body was pulled up through that hole, an investigator said. State police think that the child's corpse was stolen, for use in ritual to capture her fighting spirit.
6. Charles Walton. The brutal murder of Charles Walton, on February 14, 1945, remains one of Britain's strangest unsolved cases. Seemingly motiveless, riddled with rumors of occult practices, and hampered by a wall of silence from potential witnesses, it confounded even the greatest detective of the time, Scotland Yard's legendary Robert Fabian. On the day of his murder, Walton, a 74-year-old farmhand, went to work in the morning as normal in the town of Lower Quindon. His niece, Edith, with whom he shared a small home, grew concerned as darkness fell without any sign of him. Eventually, she set out to search for him, together with his employer, Alfred Potter, and his colleague, Harry Beasley. What they found was shocking. Walton's body lying near a hedgerow, in the field in which he had been working that day. His billhook, a tool used for hedge trimming, was buried in his neck. A pitchfork was also driven through his throat. The prong tool had been plunged so violently, that its prongs were bent back, from striking the frozen ground beneath. Walton's walking stick was found nearby with blood and hair on it, indicating a vicious beating. The murder was so brutal and so baffling, local police made the decision to bring in Scotland Yard. Upon arriving in Lower Quinton, Chief Inspector Fabian immediately started looking at those Walton interacted with on a daily basis as possible suspects. Inquiries revealed that Walton's employer, Albert Potter, was dishonest and bad-tempered. He was often late paying employees, as he was allegedly embezzling funds and juggling the remaining cash between creditors to keep them from finding out. Furthermore, when questioned, Potter's story was inconsistent, changing several times during different interviews. Fabian considered Potter the prime suspect, but never gathered enough evidence to charge him. When attempting to question locals about the crime, however, Fabian encountered a wall of silence. When villagers would speak, they said as little as possible. Some wouldn't talk at all. Were they wary of outsiders? Or did they have something to hide? The lack of possible suspects combined with the villagers' eerie silence, and the horrific state of Walton's body led to a sinister rumor: Walton's murder was occult-related. The location of the murder only fanned the flames of such rumors. The farmhand had been slain near Runyon Hill, a place known locally for its supposedly supernatural links. Furthermore, Walton was killed on February 14. According to Wikipedia, that date, under the old calendar, marked the pagan festival Imbolc, leading some to believe the murder was part of some ancient ritual. There were also rumors about Walton himself that suggested an occult-related murder. Some believed the farmhand to be a witch, with the ability to cast the evil eye upon fellow villagers, and famine upon fellow farmers. It is suggested that he had been blamed for a poor harvest in 1944, and was subsequently murdered ritualistically, so that his blood might soak back into the soil, and renew it. Another rumor, occult in nature, spread in the wake of Walton's demise, that a black dog had been seen lurking in the area where he died. The superstitious inhabitants of Quinton believed that black dogs were a harbinger of death. Even Fabian reported seeing a black dog while investigating near Runyon Hill. It's likely we'll never know the truth about Walton's murder. The perpetrator was never apprehended, and the motive never uncovered, making the bizarre and horrific case of the pitchfork murder the longest-running unsolved slaying in the history of the Warwickshire Constabulary. At the time of his investigation, Fabian fervently denied any occult-related activity associated with Walton's grisly death. However, 25 years later, Fabian made this ominous statement in his book, The Anatomy of Crime: "I advise anybody who is tempted at any time to venture into black magic, witchcraft, shamanism, call it what you will, to remember Charles Walton and to think of his death, which was clearly the ghastly climax of a pagan rite. There is no stronger argument for keeping as far away as possible from the villains with their swords, incense and mumbo-jumbo. It is prudence on which your future peace of mind and even your life could depend."
7. Baby X. On November 17, 1989, Robert Bozager and his son were going to help pull some stuck four-wheelers south of the Minidoka County landfill, located in rural Idaho. However, his pickup got stuck too, so Robert and his son started walking home. That's the first time the drum had caught anybody's attention. It had sat there for days, but everybody had dismissed it as junk from the landfill. What it actually contained was the body of a 3-week-old baby. She had been disemboweled, was missing both hands, missing her right arm, had her abdominal organs cut out, was possibly skinned, and was then burned. After the autopsy, a COD could not be determined, though it was found that the infant had pneumonia in her lungs. Due to the graphic nature of the murder, and likely to the time period, the Minidoka County prosecuting attorney Charles Creason, Jr. stated that they couldn't rule out satanic rituals. However, Sheriff Ray Jarvis wasn't as convinced. He felt that if it was some sort of occult ceremony, there would be some type of statement, a pentagram, or some sort of attention drawn to it. He also couldn't make sense of somebody leaving a body right next to a well-used four-wheeler trail. Baby X's murder brought out panic in the town. Residents called the police station to report their neighbors were Satan worshippers, or were trying to get their wife pregnant so they themselves could sacrifice a baby. Really read the long-form article I'd link at the bottom. Super interesting. By 1990, there were no leads, and no records of the birth at local hospitals. The case was close to falling off of public radar. But in July 1990, a tip finally came in. A 9-year-old boy named Timothy was being questioned by child protection officials about possible familial abuse. During the questioning, Timothy told officials he had seen a baby sacrificed and then burned. Many people believed Timothy's story, including a Twin Falls psychiatrist, who never met with Timothy, and an official named Noah Croft at the boys' school. They took the drawings and the story at Timothy's word, and never doubted him. Many other people, however, did not believe him. His story frequently changed, and his story could be incoherent and hard to follow. Some officials believed Croft was coaching Timothy. Eventually, Timothy's story was discounted. County investigators felt Timothy and his mother were not much in touch with reality. In the end, the baby was never identified, no actual COD was ever found, and Timothy's family quietly left town. Investigators believed Baby X was the baby of illegal migrant workers who died of pneumonia. The family panicked, burnt the body, and left town. Scavengers are responsible for the mutilation. The author of the article refers to the organs as being cut out, not being eaten by scavengers. Would they even eat organs? So which is it? Would scavengers take off with both hands and an arm? Possibly the family started to dismember her, thinking she would be easier to burn that way. Honestly, I've just always felt like there was more to this case. Not some occult stuff, and TBH I'm not even sure what. I guess I just have a hard time wrapping my head around the way the body was disposed of. Why not just bury her? This is a very isolated area. I would think a fire would draw more attention than digging.
8. The Jameson Family. The Sands Boys mountain range holds many secrets, from Prohibition-era stills to Indian Territory legends of cave-dwelling outlaws. A recent mystery centers on the dark and bewildering disappearance of a fall couple, who told their minister they were being haunted by demons and spirits. Nearly 7 months have passed since Bobby and Shirline Jameson and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, vanished from those mountains. Investigators have encountered a maze of possibilities when studying the family's history, leaving open every scenario from murder to the staging of their own deaths. Interviews with friends and relatives, court records and letters the Jamesons left behind depict a family in turmoil. Normally, you can go through an investigation, and one by one, start to eliminate certain scenarios, said Israel Beecham, Latimer County Sheriff. We haven't been able to do that in this case. With this family, everything seems possible. The Jamesons were last seen alive October 9 by a local man as the family was looking for a plot of land for sale. 8 days later, a hunter reported the family's abandoned pickup at a well site in the mountains northwest of Red Oak. Inside the locked, 4-door pickup with the keys, in the ignition they found Bobby Jameson's wallet, his wife's purse, a cell phone, a GPS unit, clothing and $32,000 stuffed in a bank bag beneath the driver's seat. They also found Maisie, a family dog barely clinging to life. There were no signs of a struggle. The dog was eating its own feces to stay alive, Beecham said. Why would anyone leave their family pet like that? Doesn't make sense. Then again, nothing seems to make sense about this case. A lot of investigators would love to have as many leads as we do. The problem is they point in so many different directions. A topographical map of the mountain hangs in his office to remind him of the unsolved case. Lines crisscross the map, documenting the 4 massive searches that involved hundreds of volunteers, horses, mules, 4-wheelers, 16 teams of cadaver dogs, helicopters and even an unmanned drone. The 31-year-old sheriff, a former U.S. Army Ranger and drug officer, needs little reminding. His mind is consumed by questions and theories. Throughout this whole process, I've found myself going back and forth as to what might have happened, Beecham said. I'm at my wit's end. I have asked for all the help I could get, 12 FBI agents, 3 OSB agents, Troopsy, of the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, private investigators who have contacted me. I even belittled myself to the point where I listened to psychics. Gary Brandon, a Falla pastor, told investigators the Jamesons were engaged in spiritual warfare. He said Bobby Jameson told him he often saw 2 to 4 spirits on the roof of their lakeside Eufaula home. Once, Bobby Jameson called Brandon to inquire whether there were special bullets he could use to shoot the spirits, the minister told investigators. He told the pastor he was reading the Satanic Bible for a natural remedy. Investigative notes show Shoreline Jameson told Brandon there were 3 to 4 spirits in the house, including children named Michael and Emily, and that Madison often talked to Emily's sister, a spirit that had wings. Shoreline Jameson wasn't afraid, though. She believed she had the gift to cast out demons. Graffiti on a massive storage container outside their home also prompted questions. One message reads, 3 cats killed to date by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed. Beecham said the family planned to live in the container once they acquired mountain property. Beecham said the paranoia could suggest an addiction to drugs, but has found no evidence they were users or dealers. Ruling out the role of drugs in the family's disappearance is another issue. The circumstantial evidence can't be ignored, the sheriff said. Both had lost substantial weight in the months before vanishing. They carried large amounts of cash. And a security camera mounted at their house showed them moving in, what Beecham described as trance-like motions. On the video sometimes they would just stop and stare, Beecham said. It was strange. Connie Coquette, Shoreline Jameson's mother, now wonders about a comment Bobby made last summer. They were having financial trouble, said Coquette, 59, of Midwest City. Bobby told Shoreline, I know where I can get the money, but I won't involve you. But if they were involved in drugs, I never saw any. Coquette lived with the family between March and June last year. She described her daughter as bipolar, and said Bobby Jameson lived with back pain from an automobile wreck in 2003. Shoreline was a very strong-willed person, but I saw her change dramatically, Coquette said. She became very illogical. One day she drove me to Oklahoma City and dropped me off on the street. She told me to get out of my car. So I did. Investigators have ruled out nothing, including murder-suicide. An 11-page letter from Shoreline Jameson to her husband was found in the pickup. Beecham described it as a hate letter in which she derides him as a hermit. Eufaula police found another letter in their home, that dwelled on the spiritual realm of death. They were certainly a family obsessed with death, said Beecham, adding that a .22 caliber pistol registered to Shoreline Jameson is unaccounted for. Coquette said she was with her daughter the day she bought the pistol informally from a Muskogee man. I think someone killed them, and they're still up there, Coquette said. Investigators entertained the idea the Jamesons staged their deaths. They own 2 timeshares in Mexico, and several across the United States, Beecham said. None have been used since they vanished. Motives for murder are abundant. Beecham said that's why every possible scenario remains open: robbery, revenge, a bad drug deal, even a professional hit. A collective portrait of the family led investigators to conclude they were scammers, Beecham said. Both had been receiving disability checks. They were plaintiffs in at least 2 civil lawsuits, including one against Bobby Jameson's father, Bobby Dean Jameson. We were told they were also planning to sue the Eufaula School District, Beecham said. Over what, I have no idea. One family friend questioned by investigators stayed with the Jamesons in Eufaula until being asked to leave at gunpoint. He had the barrel stuck in his ear by Shrillin, Beecham said. At first you think, great, here's someone with a motive. But the FBI cleared him. A man who lived a quarter-mile from where the pickup was found is the last known person to see the family as they ventured up the mountain. He, too, was questioned. The man claimed he never saw the family after that, Beecham said. Nor did he see anyone else go up or come down. A security camera at the Jamesons' home offered another possible clue. Before the trip to Latimer County, investigators saw Shrillin place a brown leather briefcase in the pickup. The briefcase was never found. I think it might have held a lot of cash, Beecham said. I've gone back and forth on this thing, but my latest theory, based on how the truck was parked and what was found in the truck, I think they were forced to stop and got out of the truck to meet with someone they recognized. And I think they either left willingly or by force. What happened to them after that is a mystery. Will we ever find them? I sure hope so.
9. The unsolved mystery of Detroit's occult murders. When police arrived at 3587 St. Aubin Street in Detroit, Michigan, on July 3, 1929, they found Benny Evangelista seated behind his desk, his hands neatly folded in his lap as though in prayer. They found his head on the floor right next to his feet. Upstairs they found Mrs. Santina Evangelista and their children Mario the 18-month-old baby, 7-year-old Angelina, 5-year-old Margaret, and 4-year-old Jean. Mrs. Evangelista was found in her bed with Mario. Her head had been severed, and Mario's skull was crushed. Across the hall, Angelina and Margaret were found in their twin beds massacred. On the floor, next to the bed was the body of Jean, also dead. Benny Evangelista was a Sicilian immigrant and was also the founder of his own religion known as the Union Federation of America. The church, or cult, was founded 20 years prior to his murder when Benny first arrived in Philadelphia. In 1926, he wrote a 200-page Bible entitled, The Oldest History of the World, discovered by occult science. Benny claimed to have been guided by various deities, from several religions who would only speak to him, between midnight and 3 a.m. Soon after settling in Detroit, Benny began holding services in his home. A self-proclaimed herbalist and healer, Benny also used his home as a treatment center for his followers, charging around $10 for his services. The police made several arrests in the family's murders, and questioned several suspects, but in the all turned out to be dead ends. The case quickly went cold. But as the police, and the citizens of Detroit would soon discover, the murder of the Evangelista family was only the beginning of what would be a string of bizarre cult killings that would plague Detroit from 1929 to 1932. One major suspect in the Evangelista case was a man by the name of Robert Harris. It wasn't a far stretch considering Harris was also the founder of his own Detroit-based cult and already in jail for murder. On November 20, 1932, police found the body of James J. Smith tied to a crudely built altar, and stabbed through the heart with a silver knife. Harris claimed that Smith was a willing sacrifice and had offered himself as such. However, the fact that Harris had to knock Smith out with a wagon axle before stabbing him threw suspicion on the claim. After his arrest, Harris declared himself to be a king, and revealed his plans to kill several more people, including Detroit's mayor. Although Harris had originally confessed to the Evangelista killings too, the fingerprints found at the scene did not match his. He was quickly ruled not the Evangelista killer and as just wanting to promote his own religion. But despite the unusual nature of the Evangelista case and Harris cult murders, it would not be the most unusual thing Detroit would see during those early days of the Depression. At first glance, you wouldn't think much of Rose Viers. A Hungarian immigrant, Rose was not unlike most immigrants of the time. She had escaped the harsh living conditions of the old world for a new life in America. She worked hard, and even though it was during the Depression, she still managed to piece together enough money to purchase a home, which she turned into a boarding house. But to her neighbors, Rose Viers was also known as the Witch of Delray. On August 27, 1931, police arrived at Vere's boarding house with a warrant for her arrest in connection with the deaths of 10 men who had at one time or another lived under Vere's roof. The police were tipped off to Vere's activities after the death of 68-year-old Steve Mack, who died after falling or being pushed off a ladder. It was quickly discovered that Vere's had placed life insurance policies on her boarders, and was making up to $4,000 for each death. In total, the police found 50 other insurance policies, some of which had already been paid out. Despite an overwhelming amount of evidence, Miss Vere's was not easy to convict. This was primarily due to the fact that none of Vere's neighbors wanted to testify against her. It was widely believed by her Hungarian neighbors that just making eye contact with Vere's was enough to make children sick and husbands lose their jobs. She was believed to possess great knowledge of all forms of black magic. Many have believed she had the power to transform herself into a wolf, so none of her neighbors dared testify against her. Vere's undoing wouldn't come until several years after the murders started, when more African Americans began moving into the neighborhood. Vere's found these new neighbors not as easy to intimidate, with stories of evil eyes and dark magic. After the death of Steve Mack, Vere's new neighbor, an African American by the name of George Hollish, came forward to testify that he saw a pair of arms push Mack off the ladder from an upstairs bedroom. Also damning was the testimony of African American John Walker, who said that he not only saw Mack fall, but that he was also offered $500 by Vere's to keep his mouth shut. Finally, in August, Vere's admitted to pushing Mack, claiming money as the motive. Vere's was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. However, in December of 1945, Vere's, now in her 60s, was retried and exonerated. Detroit's most prolific serial killer was set free. Several years ago, the Evangelista's home on St. Aubin Street was demolished. All that remains now is a grown-over empty lot that no one has built on since. There are those that say the site is haunted and others who have claimed to have seen a headless man walking the lot. Others have reported hearing disembodied screams. The Evangelista murders remain unsolved to this day.